I know you all have been seeing what's going on at universities around the globe at this point. The protests are something our powers that be cannot ignore. So many videos have been made on the subject from speakers who are way better than me on the subject, but I want to look at the history of student protests from two examples to see how they worked for people of the past and if there's anything to learn from them today. Spoiler alert, there is, and history is definitely on our sides, despite whatever the people like the likes of Asmongold have to say about it. It all started in October 1963, but the movie really picked up in 1966 and 1967, with more than 100 protests occurring in 1966 alone. And in 67, the first violent protest happened. I'm saying violent in air quotes there. Cops were heavily involved as per usual, and the most notable was the May 1970 protest that had 13 Kent State students shot.
Tear gas first started down the Commons, then the guard moved up on both sides of Taylor Hall and forced the kids off the Commons. Then one group, I don't know how many there were, 50 maybe, perhaps more, perhaps less, moved down to the practice football field.
And 4 died from their wounds, immortalizing their bravery forever. As capitalism does, instead of complying with the students' request, then President Nixon decided to start the invasion of Cambodia, which led to over 1,300 strikes and 500 universities closed by students and faculty strikes. Also, as a side note, ROTC facilities, which I do plan on making video about ROTC in future, we'll get back to that at a later point, were attacked as well. To wrap up a long story short, the state of Wisconsin denounced the protests and local media supported Capitol, like it always does, as Dow Jones saw no major backlash for it, and a right-wing student newspaper saw it as an act of disloyalty, just like we see nowadays with majority of the media supporting Israel. Now, what we can learn from this? I would say that the important positives of these protests outweigh any negatives from right-wing media. It gave Americans the chance to see if democracy actually does work, and the government failed them. But these actions and more by the likes of the late Muhammad Ali and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. helped end the public support of an unnecessary war from thousands of miles away. Now, to understand this particular war, I'm going to give you a little bit of cliff notes. This is basically from Marx's perspective and also from a person that believes in also dialectical materialism. So, take that for what you will. But basically from a Marxist view, resource extraction mixed with a very resource-rich place like Iraq. So basically from a Marxist view, resource extraction mixed with a very resource-rich place like Iraq, led by someone the West hated, Saddam Hussein, was a dictator. I think you would find it hard that anyone, even in Iraq, would tell you that he wasn't. And I shouldn't even have to lead with this statement, but he was objectively better than any of the U.S. friendly leaders after the deposal of Saddam Hussein. If you want any reference to that, look at the literacy rate that Saddam got to in such a short amount of time. I'll make a more in-depth video later about that, though. Okay, enough backstory. Let's get into the protest.
I want to ask you now, are we prepared to stop this war?
Books Not Bomb strike, as CBS had put it at the time, was being done right after the 9/11 tragedy. The coalition of Books Not Bombs said then President Bush's administration is intent on plunging America into an illegitimate preemptive war in Iraq that will only increase danger for Americans. A similar sentiment held by Jewish people about the Gaza war, which did not start on October 7th. In these protests, they were more worried about the true enemy, the bourgeoisie. A civil engineering major said that it is not going to be Bush and his cronies on the front line. They're going to take POCs and the poor, which ultimately the same in hyper-capitalist America. But even when the protests were quote-unquote peaceful, there were still violence done to protesters. 18 protesters in LA for blocking an intersection, for example, were arrested. So, that kind of shows maybe it wasn't all that peaceful, done unto them. I also want to say that Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction. But do you want to know who does and who has used them before when they didn't even have to? The United States of America detonated 2 nuclear bombs in civilian areas because they wouldn't negotiate with the surrendering power. We are the only ones who have detonated a weapon of mass destruction. Now, for the conclusion, both of these protests show that protests are an incredible way to show power of the people and what the people of a country actually want when their government isn't doing what the people actually want. What is happening at Columbia University, USC, and universities in Paris and all around the globe are showing what we want. Even when our vote might not matter, to stop a revolt, the rich will have to make concessions. But we will have to keep fighting for what is right in order to keep and gain more until we are over that capitalist mountaintop. Thank you for listening. If you made it this far, I plan on having videos like this once a week, giving you thought-provoking and educational content with each and every video. Hopefully, you had fun and go out there and protest. Comrades, the bourgeoisie cannot stop you.
Llegaron de la sierra porque los mandó Fidel.